Hello and welcome to the Dear Poor People podcast, DPP for short. I'm your host, Mika, and I have been working in the industry of poverty for over 14 years. And yes, I did say industry because we have been making millions, if not billions, off poor people in this country. It is the last industry to be disrupted, and it begins now with this podcast. This means we will begin to have uncomfortable and oftentimes politically incorrect conversations on this podcast. This is necessary because we have a whole generation that was raised on political correctness and respectability politics, believing that was the truth, not realizing that the truth was underneath. There's a duality that we must begin to address. We must know both the politically incorrect statement as well as the truth that is being revealed underneath the surface conversation. So I wish to issue an apology for any feelings that will get hurt in the midst of any episodes. I ask that you listen with your head, not your heart, because your heart will never pay a bill in your house. We are now living in a smart America, and as such, you must begin being smart poor. Now let's begin.
I'm addressing this letter, dear poor people, DPP. I'm addressing this letter, DPP. They your DPP, knowledge the key. And all you ain't gotta have a college degree. The answers on your laptop, the answers on your phone. Used to dread the commute, now we working from home. You are not born smart America. Age, gender, race no longer a barrier. Hop on this road to wealth, the more the merrier. DPP teach you what you should know, so you can grow, apply yourself, and graduate from being poor. DPP. You're now tuned in to the Dear Poor People podcast with your host, Coach Mika.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Dear Poor People podcast, DPP for short. And today's episode is on doing a deeper dive on identity. In the first episode, we did identify 4 critical things that every poor American must know. And that included, you are now poor in a smart America. Number 2, the lenses of identity. Number 3, you are a victor, not a victim. And number 4 is you must change your mindset. Okay, so we're going to now take a deeper dive on number 2, which is the lenses of identity, and do a much deeper dive because this was a game changer when I realized this part. Okay, and so in that last episode, we used the symbol of a phoropter, which is the machine that the eye doctor uses to test your eye strength. And so if you remember going to the eye doctor, you sit in the big black chair and you look at the poster with the E, and then they ask you to read out the lowest line you can read in its entirety. And so then they put the phoropter machine in front of your eye, and then they flip back and forth between different lenses to see which one you can see out of much more clearly, and then they'll go back and forth. Did you see better through this one or that one? And so like that phoropter, our brains work like that for identity, for reviewing our experiences, our lived experiences. As we are experiencing something, we're looking at it through the lens. In this country, primarily, most people will look at their experiences through the lens of race, gender, and now a lot of us are looking at it through sexuality. Those are the 3 major lenses that we're consciously aware of. Today, we're going to talk about the ones that may be unconscious, but we need to now bring them to being much more conscious of. And that is the identity of economic status or class. Class has been around for years, but we just don't lean into it. Now, there is much more focus on progressive politics, and a lot of people are trying to push that, and I am in support of that. But for some odd reason, this country doesn't like for us to talk about class. And I know why, because it would bring us some unification, and they don't want that. Dysfunction and confusion make much more money than unity. And if all of the poor people unified, we would be a totally different country. That's a very big reason why they don't want us to actually realize that we need each other and that we can be unified on a issue such as class. Okay. And so whenever we have an issue on class, if you'll notice, it'll then over time move into race, because then it gets people divided and they, won't support each other. Okay. So we're going to do a deeper dive on economic status and class right now. And so in A Smart America, and that will be a phrase that you hear me constantly repeat, because we need to start understanding that we are in a new America now. We're in a smart America. That technology is not going to go away. Actually, it's going to increase. They're already releasing ChatGPT and much more artificial intelligence. In a couple of years, we probably won't even know what's real. I shouldn't even say probably. We won't know what's real. So that's why this is important to talk about before all of this stuff truly real rolls out. We need to solve for these issues before we don't even understand what's going on. And so in light of the fact that we are now in a smart America, this identity of economic status is now solvable. Okay. And that is the frame of mind that you must have around your finances, is that it is solvable. Marie Forleo just wrote a book a couple of years ago called Everything is Figure Outable, and that is indeed the case now. So I want to give her credit for that book. I have not read that book, but I have, and this is a neat little trick now that we live in this smart America, is a lot of writers go on book tours, and you can watch their YouTube videos of their book talks and then get a sense of what that book is about. Eventually, she will appear on my list of books that I like or recommend or want to read that I'll be sharing on this podcast. But I like the principle that she points out, is everything is figure outable. And definitely that is the mindset you must have now, because there are so many different choices and options you have that we weren't aware of pre-internet. Okay. You had to run to the library in order to know about the different options, and nobody could run to the library. Some of us could not even drive to the library to get that information. But now you are literally walking around with that information in your hand. You just need to harness it. And so the typical workflow that we are so accustomed to is going to work a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift or an 8-hour shift, and then going home, and you said your workday is done. Now we are living in a 24-hour clock. Okay. And so a typical workflow now, even though the government won't acknowledge it, which is what I think is holding a lot of people back, is since the government hasn't acknowledged it, we feel like we don't have to act on it. And one of the most important things I'm going to tell you, and I'll repeat it again later, is that you got to listen with your eyes as well as your ears. Okay. In this new America. Okay. The most important things will never be said. Okay. And so you don't need to wait for somebody to say it in order to acknowledge that that is what is happening now. Okay. And so today, what you should do, a typical worker who's saying, hey, I don't have enough money, is that I'm just going to use this as an example. Say you're a cashier at Walmart. You get up, you do your job. If you have children, of course, you're going to kiss your children and send them off to school. You're going to work that shift. You're going to come home. You're going to kiss them. You're going to work with them with their homework, put them to bed. And then you're going to figure out what hustle you're going to do for additional income. That might be, if you have a partner in the home, you can go do Uber Eats for the rest of the night or drive Uber for a couple of hours. You might do Instacart. You might do Shipt. There's even stuff where you could let somebody, I think there's an app called CoLife where you sign up and share your home with somebody. So you might rent out a room. That is additional income. You might wrap your car in advertisements that might bring in income. So that is how you now need to view your work, quote unquote, work life. Yes, I'm in all support of raising the minimum wage, but it's also not likely that they're going to do that. Many of as more automation comes on board, they're going to get rid of some jobs. So you need to also that in the back of your mind as you're trying to learn new skills. You're trying to obtain new skills. But the whole point, and we'll talk more about workflow in future episodes, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of the mindset shift that has to be taking place now because you're in a new America. Okay. And so the old rules don't apply. So this identity, economic status, aka class, is something that we can solve for. Okay. Now, given that we can solve for it, then another unconscious identity has to come to the front of the classroom. And that is the identity of power, okay? Or as I like to call it, identity of position, okay? And this is the one I really did not recognize until both of them, I will say. I didn't know how important class was until I started working with the underserved and how they see things. And to be honest with you, I didn't see those things until I started working with them. So I'm not trying to say I'm better than my clients. I often was in the same financial predicament as my clients, but I couldn't see the issues until I saw it through their lens. What I'm trying to get at is these things came to light as a result of working with the underserved. I don't think I would have ever seen them in my previous work life as a human resources professional. It just never came up. But these issues came up working with the underserved and looking at how they look at their problems, their issues, etc. The lens of power is something that as, because we have such a huge gap between the rich and the poor, power has to come to the forefront. I know probably typically people like, say, a Roland Martin would normally look, they can see all of these various lenses and move through them, but the average citizen is not even aware of looking through the lens of power and identifying, okay, in every relationship, and a relationship is not just a romantic relationship. Anytime two people are interacting with one another, a relationship is being formed. Now, on like friendship level, everybody should be equal. But in other scenarios, like living with your parents, your work relationships, that somebody is in a position of power and somebody is not in a position of power. And oftentimes we don't acknowledge that difference. And I'm saying that in this smart America, you need to acknowledge it. And that's all I want to say is acknowledge. Do not think that that person is better than you. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that. I'm saying it's almost like if you've ever been assessed for your performance at a job, they fill out your performance appraisal, and there's always that paragraph that says that you acknowledge. It doesn't mean you agree with what they put on that form, but you are acknowledging what it says, because then if you don't make any changes, your performance following that performance appraisal, you should not get an increase, or, you might get a decrease because you never changed the behaviors that they had acknowledged in that document. And that's all I'm saying. Not saying one is better than the other if you start to acknowledge the differences. Okay. But going back to my point is that with individuals or relationships, I should say. One person is in the position of power. One person is not in the position of power. Now, once you identify what role that you're playing in that relationship, it's important to pay attention to what the other person is saying and doing. Okay. And so what we're going to talk about now is some of the things that I noticed as a result of having to I played that role of being in the position of power, being a supervisor over Snap and TANF when I was in that job. Okay, one of the things notoriously as a supervisor of SNAP, somebody's going to call every single day to check on the status of their benefits. Okay, they're going to call and say, Miss Mika, what is the status of my benefits? And I would look in the system, see if they turned in everything that was requested of them. And if I saw that, I would say something. This was in the early years of it. I certainly didn't do it towards the end. But at the very beginning of my journey of being a supervisor, I would naively say, oh yeah, it looks like everything is in here. They should be on there by Tuesday. Not realizing that client heard certainty, whereas I felt like I was being vague. Hey, but I threw out something that sounded permanent in their mind. So I would say probably it looks like they're probably going to be on there by Tuesday. Okay. They heard those benefits were going to be on their card on Tuesday. And so the following Tuesday, they were going to call. Well, Miss Mika, you said they were going to be on your card on Tuesday. They not on my card this morning. And I would feel awful and frustrated that I'm like, because by that time I probably have talked to 15 other people. So number one, I didn't remember even talking with them, but they could quote line, and just like as if you're working with your teenage child that remembers that you said, hey, we're going to the movies we're going to the 6:00 showing of Bad Boys for Life, just because you said it. And then now you tie it on that day, but you told them, hey, we're going to see the movie on 6 p.m. on Tuesday. They can quote line and verse just like your child. And so I had to quickly learn that they put trust in me. They saw me as the position of power, and they trusted in my word. Okay. And they weren't planning to develop a plan A, B, or C in case that word was not true. And that taught me the power of integrity, which is lacking in our society now. And so that's why I'm pointing out what you need to be paying attention to. Okay. But you're not in the position of power. You are giving a lot of trust to the person that is in the position of power, especially when you're dependent upon that person. Okay. And you do see that when you're a child, you are dependent upon your parents and you trust that they're going to provide all your needs. Same thing happens with those who are dependent upon the government. It's just that I didn't know that they would bestow on me that level of trust until it happened to me repeatedly over and over again. And I would get upset that, like, wait a minute, number one, I don't even remember saying that. But, I had to realize, hey, wait a minute, they hear what I'm saying totally different than what I'm saying it as. And that goes back to the great definition of the word assume. Assume means to believe without evidence. Okay, to believe something as truth without evidence. And the definition of to imply means to strongly suggest the truth or existence of something not expressly stated. And I think those in positions of power take that for granted, that they can just say something and then not back it up. And tell you the truth, they create policies, I'm speaking about government, that they know don't add up, or that leaves a lot to be desired it doesn't meet all the specifications because they don't even associate it with integrity. That somebody is actually believing in your word to that degree. Now that harkens back to another word that we need to define, and that is the word patriarchy. And the first part of that word, patri, P-A-T-R-I, means father. So we at one time operated like a patriarchy in this country, in that you looked at your country kind of the way you would look at your father. They provide for you. That is no longer the case. As a matter of fact, if we harken back to the Reagan administration, when they first began to change the dynamics around the welfare programs and things like that, that was the first hiccup with changing what those programs were all about. And even when you look at his great economic program, and I'm saying that in jest, trickle-down economics, if you think about it, trickle-down economics would never have made it in the age of the internet, because whoever got wet from a trickle? It makes no sense. The whole premise of trickle-down economics was if you give the people at the top, the companies, the money to make their companies work, then it'll trickle down to the workers. That is baloney, because they then started to give those companies tax breaks. They still pushed the whole notion of trickle-down economics, but then they back-ended it with a whole bunch of tax breaks for the rich. So it's never going to trickle down to you. In the age of the internet, you have 50 million voices that you can hear. Back then, you could only hear that one voice. They could drown out all the other voices. Today, that's impossible to drown out all of those voices. And so you can hear from other perspectives. They could drown out other economists who would say that trickle-down economics was not a good sound policy back in the 80s. Today, that's impossible to do. So that's why you see the differences in how we're processing some of these wars that we're in and things like that, because you can hear the other voices. You can hear directly from the people that are experiencing the issues now. You could not do that back then. Somebody in a position of power wanted you to know. Okay. And so now the power is in you. You have to identify the position that you hold in that relationship. And if you're not in the position of power, then you need to be questioning, okay, now what did you leave out? That is one little tip that I started to, once I saw this and recognized this, number one, I just want to go ahead and say it. I stopped being that, I started being much more vague with my clients when they would ask me because if I was not directly overseeing the person that was going to process your case, I didn't give you specifics anymore. Okay. If I wasn't going to be the one processing the case or or person on my team or in my office, I wasn't vouching for what day you would get your benefits on. I would just say, okay, well, it looks like everything is in there. I'll send out an email to the county that is working on your case to let that worker know you want to know when your case would be worked on, and I'll point out the things that you turned in, and then that's all I can do. Okay. And so then that puts the ownership back on the person who has the issue, which is the client. And that client should then have to come up with their plan A or plan B. Okay. And now, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, now that we live in a smart America, you have 50 million ways to get income while you're waiting for your benefits to come on. Do not, feel so desperate. I don't want anybody to feel desperate anymore. Yes, if you quote unquote work for Uber for a few days until your benefits kick on, yes, that will count as income in your next certification. But by that time, if you so choose to do so, you could have decided that you don't want to work for Uber, but it's good to have it in the clutch in case something should happen. Okay. Now, which brings up a good point that I'll have to do a deeper dive on in a future video. But because we are now in a smart America, you can see the quote unquote future. You know, we share everything. So we're sharing each other's experiences with each other now. Like all of our memories used to be in photo albums. Nobody buys photo albums now. We keep them in our phones and we share them on Facebook or we share them on social media. So for example, there was a couple of articles where kids, and there was a big craze on TikTok about retiring the Walmart workers. And then one article was talking about how these cute little kids retired their janitor once he came back from retirement, when he realized he could not afford to live on his retirement. So when he came back to work, they retired him by doing fundraising and presented him with a check big enough for him to retire. Okay. Now, many of y'all would say, oh, that's such a sweet story. And that's where it would end. For me, because I have been a food stamp worker working with the eSNAP program, which is the elderly SNAP program, I saw every week what happens when you get, say, for example, an increase in your Social Security. It impacts your SNAP. Your Social Security income does get counted in your SNAP benefits. And so when they do the calculation, oftentimes, and this is pre-pandemic, the average amount, and I can only speak for South Carolina, the average amount that a elderly participant was getting in South Carolina pre-pandemic was maybe anywhere between $16 and $20. And every Monday, I would get a report from the Social Security Administration of who got an increase that month, and then I'd have to touch their account, hit the button so that it would recalculate, are they still within the income range to still get SNAP? And oftentimes what that increase did was lower their benefits, and they might actually have to owe some food stamps back. So many a time I had to input letters. The letters were already manufactured, and you just hit the button and you release a letter that says, hey, dear so-and-so, your benefits have been reduced to $6 and you owe $10, and this is how we'll take it back and stuff like that. So that taught me that I need to be conscious of the fact that Social Security is not a standalone program anymore. And only because, they make the statistics very knowledgeable, but I'm just going to use the African American community. It's my understanding that 40% of our elderly population is purely living on their Social Security benefits. That can no longer be the case anymore because it is not a single solo program anymore. You got to have Social Security plus something else now. So harken back to the point I was trying to make, because a lot of people are scared to leave these programs. But now that you can forecast what is going to happen to you, you may begin to view these programs as safety traps as opposed to safety nets. Okay, but we'll talk about that in a future episode. But I just wanted to say, I made that point so that that might be viable to start anytime that you call and you're hearing, hey, the person's being very vague as to when the benefits are coming onto your card. That's because that's to incentivize you to say, hey, I need to still feed my children, regardless of what this person says. I'm not to count on what they're saying. Okay. And I need to have a plan A, B, or C to make sure that my children get fed, because in that situation of the imply versus assume, who hurts the most? The person who assumed or the person who implied? The person who assumed gets hurt the most because they put their faith in something that was not real. Okay. And just to harken back to what the Bible says, do not put your trust in man. So see how the things connect? So that is a key critical lesson that I learned as a result of working with the underserved. So I have to thank everybody for that lesson, because moving forward, I have changed how I see people in positions of power and hear them. I pay much more close attention to what is not being said so that I am prepared for the rainy day, because oftentimes they will only tell you about the sunshine. They ain't gonna tell you about the rain. Okay. And now that I know that the rain is coming, I am getting prepared, which is the whole premise of the Smart Poor methodology. Now that we are in a smart America, the only type of poor you can be is smart poor. And that is to be conscious of your economic status and your position in the relationship, and then act accordingly. So this ties back into that fourth principle now with the mindset shift has to change. It's not even optional anymore, because there should be no premise in your mind that you're good, like just relying on the government, relying on the integrity of individuals that you elect, because they'll say anything because they don't have to count on their word. But you're counting on their word. And so that's a manipulation. So I don't like that anymore. And so I don't adhere to that. I love that I can now listen to them, hear them, and I can process, okay, what do I need to take from what they said? And then knowing that the $1 million question isn't what isn't being said. Now, sometimes I will say that aloud, or I will say in my mind. This is a lot of what I'm talking about is stuff that's going to be happening in your mind. That how quickly we go through those lenses when you're at that eye doctor, that's kind of what I'm saying with this mindset shift. Is these are the things that are going to be happening as you're processing the information that is coming to you. You want to be able to move through that information through those two lenses in order to help you make solid, good decisions, because once again, you have the answer. So you must acknowledge that. That needs to now be the mindset that you bring into any decisions that you make now. You got to start with, I have the answer to the questions I seek. Okay. And so that means first taking a time out to research what those answers are, and then knowing what your role is in the situation. Are you in the position of power, or are you not in the position of power? If you're not in the position of power, you have to say that. I'm not in the position of power, therefore I must, boom, boom, boom. And so in the scenario, say, of the parent that's calling me, they would say, oh, I heard what Miss Mika said. Therefore, I must come up with a plan for how I'm going to feed my children, because I don't know when the benefits will hit my card. Okay. And so therefore I can drive for Uber if I still have a vehicle. I can make t-shirts out of my house if I need to stay at home. What else comes very quickly as income? I could make treats and sell them out of my home, put up a Facebook post that I have Chewies or Red Velvet, and get that income in until the benefits hit my card. Okay. Like I said, in future episodes, we're going to talk about the safety trap versus the safety net. But that is not the focus today. I really wanted to just do a deeper dive on identity, as well as the mindset shift that needs to happen as a result of that, which results in making good decisions, because that is what is going to be the key to living the rest of the time that we live in a smart America. You will not be poor because of your racial identity. You will be poor because you did not try. Now, that does not mean that racism is going away. Racism will never leave, because all of the isms, racism, sexism, ageism, and any other ism, is a child of capitalism. So unless we're going to get rid of capitalism, we're not going to get rid of any of the other isms, but we can minimize the impact that they have on your life, because we are all going to understand capitalism in the same way. So that way, when we experience these issues, we can minimize the impact that they will have on our experience. Okay. And so we're going to do a deeper dive on that racial implication in our next episode. But I just wanted to say that today, you do need to focus on your multiple streams of income. That now needs to be the law of the land. You will develop multiple streams of income. You will not be desperate poor. You will embrace being smart poor and developing multiple streams of income, because all of that, and we're going to do this as a different episode as well, but all of that helps your mental health. One of the things that I also discovered as a result of this work is that much of what a lot of poor people are experiencing is they're living in a continuous cycle of stress. Stress kills. Poverty technically is a health issue. Also, what I have discovered most recently through the new job that I have is that if you put up a definition of the word depression and the criteria, and then you put up what the average poor person experiences in a day, you're going to see a lot of alignment. It could be that the way you're operating is because you're technically in a depressed state of mind and you can't think clearly in a depressed state of mind. One of the criteria that the doctors use when they're measuring depression is, do you have goals? Do you have a vision for yourself? And what you will find is that a lot of poor people do not have a vision. I used to do the SNAP aid program, which stands for Able-Bodied Adults Without Dependents. And I would talk to them. I'd pour into them, probably a little bit too long. But I was passionate about saying, hey, you have opportunities. And I would try to find out, where do you see yourself in 5 years? A lot of them, well into their grown ages, would say they don't know. Now, I can understand that if you're 18 and you're 20. But the people who were in their 40s and their 30s, I was shocked at the number who could not tell me what vision they had for themselves. And that is because in that state of mind, all they could see was what they don't have, as opposed to what they do have. Okay. And in this new world, it doesn't take much now. Okay. You can just have a phone and sit outside your house and talk. And no telling how much money you could make just from that. Okay. So it's reframing that mindset. Okay. So just to wrap up, some of the things that we talked about is making, now that we're in a smart America, we will have to operate in being smart poor. Okay. And that's a shift in your mindset. And we are going to have to acknowledge economic status as an identity. Okay. We're not going to move the needle and keep the conversation going on to race. We're going to stay focused on class because it is solvable. And we're also going to highlight power and how power moves and how we have to move as a result of how power is moving. Okay. Now that you can see power is not a hidden issue now. Like, rich people are not characters on TV shows. You can literally hear them on a podcast or any other means of social media. And you will often find out that none of them are focused on solving your problem. Okay. And so you have to be aware of that. You have to be your own victor, not a victim.
Well, that concludes this episode of Dear Poor People with your host, Coach Mika. Be sure to never miss an episode by following at Dear Poor People on Spotify and YouTube. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, be sure to join the DPP squad.